Takk skal du ha, Jens. Vi gleder oss til debatten også på søndag. Vi har 3 til som skal hilse kongressen. Det er representanter fra de internasjonale gjestene, og det er representanter fra 3 viktige internasjonale organisasjoner som vi er medlem av. Det er altså ITUC, som er den internasjonale organisasjonen. Det er DEFS, som er den europeiske samorganisasjonen. Og så er det NFS, som er den nordiske faglige samorganisasjonen. Så først så har jeg da gleden av å gi ordet til ITUCs generalsekretær, Sharon Burrow. Hun har hatt vervet siden 2010. Fra 2006 til 2010 var hun president i samme organisasjon, og er den første kvinnen som leder internasjonal fagbevegelse. Så Sharon, the floor is yours.
Greetings. Thank you, Raw. Comrades and friends, I'm proud to stand amongst such strong trade union men and women. Raw, I salute your leadership team, and I particularly thank Trina Lisa, who I see most often, for her great work on the ILO governing body. But it's to all of you, the members of the great LO, that I extend my admiration and my congratulations for your achievements. In a world where workers' rights and trade unions are under attack, almost everywhere now, the social model you have built stands as a beacon of inspiration, of justice and hope. I know you will fight to maintain it, and I salute you and your Prime Minister. I've just come from Turkey, where yesterday I was witness to the front lines of a brutal attack on workers and their democratic rights and freedoms. I was at the barricades when police and security forces fired tear gas and rubber bullets on small groups of workers on the orders of a government. We can't imagine that. You can't imagine that here in Norway. But it's all too prevalent now. From early morning until late in the evening of May 1, our day, May Day, 40,000 police in riot gear and gas masks are thought to have been on the streets of Istanbul. With more than 200 injured and 3 serious cases, including a 17-year-old girl, scars from May Day 2013 will run deep for the millions of workers in Turkey, but also it will run deep in the veins of the international trade union movement. The president of the DIS said to me on Wednesday night, I've lost track of this week, we wanted to go to Taksim Square with you and sing songs of peace, but instead the government unleashed the instruments of war. And on top of the brutality, the Labor minister chose this day, Workers' Day, to announce further cuts in severance pay and increased flexibility or contracting out of jobs. So while alongside Turkish unions we will fight for democratic rights and freedoms, sadly this struggle for all of us is not just in Turkey. The war on workers' rights is global. It's why I feel in a safe haven today, as long as indeed you do re-elect your government. But it's why we must build workers' power in every corner of the world. And I want to take this opportunity to thank you for the deep solidarity with which you support the work of unions around the world. You make international work possible, and that work is more important than ever. While your solidarity is legendary, and I know you will debate many issues, for our world is full of tragedy and injustice, let me particularly acknowledge your unrelenting support for peace and statehood for Palestine. If we can see an end to the occupation of Palestine, then a world of peace and social justice is truly possible. And with you, I pledge never to give up on this issue. We must stop the oppression everywhere. The attacks on workers' rights, the attacks on democracy. You can only imagine the heartbreak throughout the Arab world after the Arab Springs, now to have it turned back on them, and particularly to see erosion of women's rights in the process. We must break down the barricades to decent work and social justice, and I take inspiration from the strength of LO. Europe, you know, and Bernadette will address you, is battling the devastating legacy of austerity that you know has become an attack on workers, an attack on fundamental rights. The ITUC is tackling the challenge of stopping the attacks on the European social model and rebuilding the economies. But the policy motivation goes beyond Europe. At the IMF meetings just 2 weeks ago, policymakers had the gall to talk about austerity fatigue, as if austerity was some artifice divorced from the misery imposed by the IMF, the European Commission, the ECB, people, misery on people and their families. Because the international organisations have joined forces, supposed to protect our world, the IMF, the European Commission, the European Central Bank, sections of the OECD and others, champions now for labour market deregulation at any cost. Now, of course, you see that as conditionality in debt-torn countries on the demands, but it goes beyond debt-torn countries to the policy demands on so many others. And many of the European representatives, Hungary, Bulgaria, Romania, are here today. While they have got this so wrong, and while in fact the international debate rages between economists about whether the legitimacy of the data that underpinned this policy was even correct, their demands persist. And we are the only bulwark. It is only unions, workers saying, you are wrong, this is not the world we want or we will accept. They have failed. In fact, they've driven more countries into recession. They did not prevent the economic crisis for which they were established. They are still failing in the quest to regulate the greed and destruction of speculative capital, which is in fact greater today than it was before the crisis. The IMF again in April revised global growth forecasts down to barely more than 3%, with Europe in recession. Even the optimism for the emerging economies is dimmed, with, for example, Brazil's growth projection falling to 3%. So the warning, Jens, you give is one we take to heart. The global economy is no more secure than it was 5 years ago. The number of people unemployed is climbing again to 210 million. 75 million young people will be jobless in 2012. Some countries face up to 60% youth unemployment. Imagine that. And the denial of the dignity of work for a whole generation is simply an economic and social time bomb. Inequality is growing and it's poisonous. It is both economic and social poison, robbing economies of stability and the people of dignity of just being able to survive. The challenge of inequality and the fight for workers' rights is in fact our challenge. Our latest Frontline report takes on the IMF. It actually uses empirical evidence that demonstrates that collective bargaining creates more equal societies and secures both aggregate demand and jobs. It also tells the stories of workers who have suffered as a result of the attacks on fundamental jobs and rights. Too many of our members in Europe and around the world are in the front lines of a war on workers, from the very forces that brought the financial systems to its knees in 2008. You ask our comrades in Central and Eastern Europe, who is their most invisible but their biggest enemy? Or in Ireland, or other parts of Europe, or in Africa, or Asia, or China, it's the American Chamber of Commerce. It's a corporate model of greed we will not accept. And having a taste of blood of workers, the organised employers have now taken this fight inside the ILO. Inside the ILO. Trina Lisa knows better than anybody that challenging governments to abandon the ILO jurisprudence is now a fight we have in the only place in the UN where our standards are created and defended. And of course it's begun with the right to strike, but it doesn't stop there. Therefore, our fight is now also with opportunistic employers as well as against weak and exploitative governments. People are losing faith in elected leaders, indeed in democracy. Our own global poll conducted in 2012, and we have another in the field now, demonstrates the fear and insecurity of people in almost all countries. The result is a fundamental lack of trust in democracy. 66% of people believe that the next generation, our children and grandchildren, will be worse off. That puts paid to all of the years of struggle that you have all been involved in. So defend what you have to the death. 71% of people believe that they lack any legal protection for jobs, and 79% can't save a euro, a dollar, a unit of currency. They can't save anything. So how on earth is it possible that this is a just world? Children are again going to school hungry, and the desperation of the informal sector is growing. It must stop. We want an alternative. We demand a plan. We demand hope. Our message is jobs, jobs and jobs. We know how to build economies. It requires investment in jobs. The biggest medium-term multiplier is infrastructure. And indeed, we want to see genuine solidarity and coordination across the major economies of that investment. We've challenged the G20 to invest €1 trillion in infrastructure. By the way, that's just half of the money they gave to the banks. That would be a good start. Our own research shows that climate action can create millions of jobs, and there are no jobs on a dead planet. So we need ambitious support for climate action and the jobs of a green economy. The care economy, absolutely, as your Prime Minister said, caring for and educating our people can deliver many, many new jobs around the world. And the inclusion of young workers is possible with youth guarantees that include quality apprenticeships and internships. The participation of women is still the single greatest boost for productivity. So let's get going. We also need to formalise jobs in the informal sector, dominated by migrants, women and young people in desperation. That requires social protection, a minimum wage on which they can live, and these things are just political will. They're just political will. Collective bargaining for a fair share of the nation's wealth in wages is a key part of the solution, which you know firsthand, absolutely firsthand. But to achieve our ambitions, we have to build the power of workers. Because despite the strength of the LO, I'm telling you that we are trying to shape a world of decent work with only 7% of the 2.9 billion workers organised globally. 2.9 billion workers, and we are just 7%. That's simply not enough power. 40% of those workers are in the informal economy, and we have a responsibility to do something about that to protect our own base, but also in terms of social justice. Then, of course, there are the slave states like Qatar, where migrant workers have no freedom of association, no rights and protections, are forced to live in squalor of one of the richest nations in the world, and yet our governments pay homage. They pay homage to that country. I thank you for your support of our Qatar campaign, that there will be no World Cup in Qatar unless there are labour rights. And I know you will back us in our current phase, which is a demand for FIFA, what a corrupt organisation, to rerun the vote. Nobody wants to see the game shamed. And so we need to play this campaign out until there are rights in Qatar. But I leave you with this challenge. The ITUC is focused on 3 core objectives: union growth, sustainable jobs, secure incomes and social protection, and realising rights. This is the lens through which we now prioritise all of our work. It will form the basis of our Congress debate next year, a much more interactive Congress that will debate priorities for a 4-year plan of action. But a world where decent work and social protection and equality are realised means we must organise. We must organise in our workplaces, our communities and across nations, industrial and political organising. We are building the tools. The ITUC is shifting its focus. We are training a global network of organisers. We are building the research and the capacity to organise in our communities. We have built our own digital newspaper, and I hope you all sign up. Join us and the Qatar campaign at equaltimes.org. But the main message is organising. Organising to take back our rights, to protect our democracies and to build a just future. Organising has always been the answer. It's still the answer. We can do it. Solidarity.